We're joined in studio today as we continue our series of big-time guests. We're joined by the, I don't know, I just figure you run 247 Sports. Is that correct?
No. Definitely not.
He is a scout with 247 Sports. He is Gabe Brooks. Hi, Gabe.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in and spending Braves opening day with us.
Yes.
We appreciate that.
Yes.
And also sitting to my right, he is the recruiting analyst for Dave Campbell's Texas Football from Next Level Athlete. It's our friend Greg Powers. Hi,
Yeah,
Greg.
it's also opening day for the Reds.
It's also opening day for the Reds. Who do they play?
The Braves.
How do you think that's going to go?
I think it's going to go bad.
Y'all should fight.
Honestly, about like how it did in the playoffs.
I was going to say. Today's Thursday, April 7th, 2022, 231 days till Thanksgiving. Happy birthday.
To my pappy.
Oh, okay. Happy birthday to Pickles
It's
Pappy.
his 75th birthday.
Pappy Pickle.
Pappy Pickle.
Pappy Pickle.
Happy
No,
birthday,
other side of the family, but yes.
happy birthday, Pappy
Jones.
Jones. And happy birthday to Adrian Beltre. That is, guys.
That's a big one for you,
That's,
huh?
oh, buddy. I've never been to Cooperstown. I'm waiting until he goes in, and then it's like, I'm taking a week, and I'm going up there and just basking in the Adrian Beltre glory. It's episode 1364. We're going to talk some recruiting today with Gabe Brooks of 247 Sports and Greg Powers of Next Level Athlete. So if you've ever had questions about recruiting and how people cover recruiting or analyze prospects or analyze film, et cetera, you can get those questions in on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, etc. We'll get to as many as we can throughout the course of the show. First, Pickle, do we have first four through the door?
We sure do. It was Rob Hadaway, Nick Morton, Aaron Arbuckle, and some guy named Matt Stupp. Never heard of him.
The Canadian?
Yes.
The Canadian. That's fine. I didn't know they had internet in Canada, honestly. I found that out recently. It's good for them. Okay. Gabe,
Yep.
we wanted to have you on yesterday because normally our recruiting show is on Wednesday. But you told us we got in touch with your booking agent, and she said no.
She just stiff-armed me.
Yeah, she was like, absolutely not.
She said that pickle
'Cause-
girl,
Because
not happening.
yesterday was a big day over there at 247 Sports because you guys released your 2024 initial rankings, right?
Yes. So we had, last August, we had the initial top 100 nationally, which is essentially just a watch list.
Mm-hmm.
So we expanded that out to our first top 24/7, 247 players and beyond, which goes into the 3-star range. So I bet we have probably 400 plus evaluated in that class now nationally.
Mm-hmm.
In Texas, it's about 50 so far. And by the end of the cycle, in almost 2 years, that'll be, 400-ish in Texas alone, probably 300 to 400.
So in this initial 247, do you know how many Texans there are offhand or ballpark?
Between I think it's 36. I think it's between 35 and 40, which is pretty normal.
Who's the top rated Texan?
Jelani Watkins.
Okay.
Who is maybe the fastest player in the country if you go off of track data, which is extremely important to us because it bears. We're graded. We're ultimately graded by the NFL draft, and so people are like, "Well, why are that's really hard to do? Why do you do that?" Yeah, it is very hard, but how else do you try to quantify evaluating the evaluation process other than the NFL draft? And that's what. Every year of the draft, this guy was a 5-star, this guy was a 3-star, this guy was a 2-star, like all that stuff. So we try to project to the NFL draft, not to college success. So we look for certain traits that we see in NFL drafts, which track and field is.
So that's why
very, very important.
That's why you're always out there with a stopwatch. Stuff like that is what you're saying.
No.
And, of course, Jelani Watkins is the brother of Amani Watkins, TCU. TCU's Amani Watkins, and goes to Klein Forest. Already possesses double-digit offers, Texas A&M, TCU among them. So
Now, Gabe, how long have you been in the recruiting game?
8 years, since February of 2014.
Okay.
When he hired me.
Okay. because I want to get to that. You two have a long history together.
Oh yeah.
What an outstanding fist bump that was. Well done.
And how often do you two disagree on a prospect? How often do you guys
all the time? I mean, our ideologies fall in line a lot, and then they differ a lot on certain areas. I think that we both have strengths and weaknesses as it comes to evaluating certain positions. I mean, you're talking to two guys that have to evaluate everybody, you know what I mean, in the state, and now Gabe does a lot more nationally as well. And sometimes it's like comparing apples to oranges when you're talking about certain positions, certain high schools, certain regions, certain states. Like, there's a lot of factors that really, to me, go into an entire evaluation, and it's ever changing. You know, we're talking about Jelani Watkins being the number one player per 247 Sports' rankings in that 2024 class, but that's not to say that he'll end up number one, because there's a lot of time left in that class to evaluate it.
That's like the big takeaway with 2024. There's a whole lot of time. I mean, there's a lot of time left in 23.
Right. So this is the first draft, is what you're saying.
Yeah, this is like, you know, something that we concentrated on was traits. Like the 5'7" guy who ran for 2,800 yards his sophomore year, but doesn't have any track and field, doesn't have any verified testing, and he's 5'7". This isn't a specific guy. This is just an example. Is not going to be valued as much early in the process as the 5'11" running back who has run an 11.0, you know, an 11 flat 100 meters, has been verified in the 4.6 range. You know, even if he had, you know, part-time carries and ran for 700 yards.
So right now you would say that, and maybe this is for both of you guys, that projecting out these rankings right now is more based on, it's based more on measurables now than it will be maybe when we get to the final rankings for the class of 2023, 2024, things like that. Is it a situation like that?
I don't know if I would say more than then, because the measurables really carry a lot of weight for us because we are looking for draft traits. But as far as, you know, just trying to get the right names, whether they're in the national top 50 or the, you know, number 200, which in the grand scheme of things, on paper it seems like a big difference, but mathematically that's really not that big a difference. Like a top 200 guy and a top 50 guy is not that big a difference. But the point is that we just want to have the right as one of my colleagues, Cooper Patagna, who has been director of player personnel at Michigan and Washington and Oregon, he wants to get, you know, he says we want to get guys in the right buckets. And that's kind of what we try to do. I mean, nobody ideally wants to evaluate players this early. It's still extremely early, but it's just part of the beast. It's the nature of the beast. So, you know, we really emphasize traits now, and I mean, for the duration, but especially right now.
I think Gabe made a pretty good point in the fact that, you know, they are evaluating players as it relates to the NFL draft, and we kind of do it a little bit different, which is going to give you a different sort of take on the rankings. We're projecting more here on how they're going to be in college, you know, and that's that is a pretty huge difference, because whether you run a 4.3 540 or a 4.5 40 may not be that vast when you're talking about this kid's going on to play at SMU. But when the NFL teams evaluate a guy, they're going to always, if everything is equal, they're going to go with the faster, bigger, stronger guy every time. And that can really have a big change as you look at the rankings. You know, that could put a guy number one that's different than what we may have in the long run.
You mentioned that you feel like this is really early. And obviously, look, this is a business, and there's a lot of interest in recruiting, and the earlier you can get this stuff out there, I mean, there are people who put out, there's probably a list of 2027 recruits out there.
By some random Twitter account.
by at Slappy on Twitter or something like that. But let me ask kind of both of you. And obviously it varies from prospect to prospect. But when is there a time in a player's career, high school career, that comes that you feel like, all right, now I feel like I have a pretty good feel for who you are and how you stack up. Is it at the end of their senior season? Is it maybe after their junior season? And obviously every prospect is different, but is there generally a time frame where you're like, all right, I have a pretty good idea of who you are?
I would say junior tape, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Oh, I think junior tape is by far the most important, but I love to go even a little bit. I mean, I think the camp settings are pretty important, following that junior season to get some verified measurables and some verified times at some of the camps. Like, that's pretty important too, to kind of put a cap on it, because the junior tape is the jumping off point, and then to separate out those guys can sometimes come down to measurables and 40 times to me.
Yes, and
track times
on top. Yeah, I was going to say that spring of your junior year, the track and field, especially in Texas. I mean, for example, I use a couple of different track websites. One of them is Mile Split, which is a national one. Just looking on there recently, I think it was in the last 2 weeks, 8 of the top 10 4x100 relays in the country are in Texas.
Wow.
So, does that say, that doesn't necessarily mean that there needs to be 120 guys in the top 250 players in the country, from Texas. But recent drafts have been pretty heavy on Texas guys, especially higher. And, there a lot of them the majority of them are multi-sport. And that, like Greg said, that spring, not only combine camp setting, but the track and field really, Evan Stewart looks really, really good on the field his junior year, and then he almost long jumps 25 feet, and he runs a 10.5, I think.
He's fast.
Yeah. So, like, it gives you even more ammunition to be convicted about somebody.
He's
like
also
that.
very marketable.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
I thought of an answer, I think, to one of your prior questions, too, as it relates how we see things differently sometimes. I would say offensive line, Gabe, is the position where we have the most disagreements, because I like the big guys, and this is even like college philosophies, NFL philosophies. There are, offensive line coaches out there who love these bigger guys. They think that they're going to get them in shape. I kind of trend towards those guys, and Gabe kind of likes the guys that you can add, to their frame. I think you would really be high on a 6'5", 260-pound offensive tackle that has long arms, and you can project them out a little bit more. And to the NFL point, that's probably accurate. And I like the college ready hog mollies.
No,
you know what I mean? Like, I love those guys.
There were a couple of, there were a few drafts where there was one in particular that was kind of like the exclamation mark of a little string of drafts, where there were 5 first-round offensive tackles and none weighed 300 pounds in high school.
Yeah.
And one was 240, and the other one was a 225-pound quarterback in high school that went.
Lane Johnson?
No, it was the guy. I think the guy the Texans drafted out of an FCS school like 3 years ago. But these last couple of drafts, Penei Sewell, Mekhi Becton, and I mean, there are like these kids are getting bigger by the year, and finding these, the 6'5", 260 types is not quite as easy as it may have been 4 years ago. There's a guy going to Ohio State named Tegra Shabola who showed up to the All-American Bowl and moved as well as anybody there, and was 6'5.5", 355.
Wow.
And
so he's done. Like, he's a finished product almost.
Like physically, yeah. Like you can reshape it some, but like if you went up and asked somebody, you said, how much do you think that guy's weighs? He weighs about 300. Like, that's how well he wears it. So, having said that, our number one offensive tackle in the country, who is making his commitment tomorrow, a 2022 guy who's committing late, Josh Connerly from Washington. He's 6'5", 283, 34.5-inch arms, plays basketball, played both ways in high school. So that fits the profile of what Greg is kind of talking about, that we at 247 often look for, are these big-framed relatively lean athletes who have movement skill.
So it's Greg Powers and Gabe Brooks joining us here on Texas Football Today, talking recruiting today. We had SMU's director of scouting, Alex Brown, in yesterday. We were chatting him up, and one of the things I kind of mentioned to him was about, and this is something Powers and I talk about a lot, is like football playing dudes, right? You watch them and you see them on the field and they're super productive. And for me as a recruiting dummy, I'm like, well, it seems like being good at football seems important to playing football. Why don't you just go get that guy? So obviously but there are measurables that come into fact and stuff like that. So especially because I know your philosophy on it a little bit, but for both of you guys, is there a point where a guy can be so productive in high school, obviously adjusted for classification and competition and things like that, but can be so productive that he can overcome deficiencies in measurables? I think Cooper Kupp's an easy example of a guy who's just like, he was hyper productive in high school, hyper productive in college, obviously pretty good in the NFL. Is there a point where a guy is so productive that you go and you're like, I need to go and take another look at this kid?
I think we could talk about this forever. You know what I mean? Like, this is one of those topics that you could really go down a rabbit hole here and kind of dive into it. I like to think of a guy like Doug Brooks, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, here's a prime example of a guy who is a Mr. Everything on the field. And I'm not saying that this is like a Doug Brooks problem. This isn't a Doug Brooks problem at all. This is just a generalization of making sure that you list your measurables accurately on Huddle. And this is like if recruits and coaches, high school coaches, are listening to this kind of stuff, today, make sure the measurables are accurate, that there aren't disappointments. If you're listed at 6'1" on your Huddle tape, the coach shows up and you're 5'10", you know what I mean? That's going to create
You wouldn't believe how many
it's a lot.
Are listed at 6'1" who don't sniff 6 feet.
Yeah, so I mean that's a big thing because
we put together a magazine where people submit their height, width, and 40s, and I tell people all the time, man, you'd be stunned at how many kids run a 4.4 in this state.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you're saying that's a small thing of like just like don't lie to us. Like
just keep it accurate so that gets you dialed in quicker to the right type of schools. But Doug Brooks is a guy that you would watch on the high school tape or on the in the state championship game, and you're like, wow, this guy could play for anybody in the country. He's playing running back and he's a defensive tackle, but he was probably in that 5'11", 255 range, 250, something like that, which his size may have limited his overall recruitment in some regards. I mean, there were some other things there too to keep an eye on as colleges were monitoring his progress. But I mean, there's guys like Texas High has a guy this year, Brandon Childs, defensive tackle there, and not on everybody's radar, but he's a 275 pounder that can squat 650 pounds and benches 355. No one really knows about him yet, but to me, he's a guy who can really go. But will his size or height limit his recruitment in general? Plus, he's all the way out at Texas High. Will that also limit the eyes that see him? There are just so many. I guess my long answer is that so many variables.
There's a lot of variables, and I think one of the main ones in that discussion is it's very position specific. Like there's certain positions where you have to be.
You're not gonna. You
have to be this tall to
if
ride.
you're 5'11", you're not gonna play tackle in college, and you're not gonna go to the NFL.
Not
unless
you're
tackle.
Not unless you're Brandon Kennedy.
Yeah.
One of my first years covering recruiting, now OU head coach Brent Venables said 2 inches short, 10 pounds overweight, 2 inches right, 2 inches left, and we don't want to have anything to do with you. You know what I mean? Like, and that's a pretty good way to encapsulate it for college programs, as they're looking that those 2 inches can make a pretty big difference.
Right. Like an example I came up with, Coy Aiken, the receiver from Stephenville, was a guy who I think probably doesn't have that top end speed. I think is my guess is he doesn't have that top end speed. But then you look at the numbers, you're like, oh, well, he's just going nuts every single day, every single night. Now, obviously, they run a receiver friendly system and things like that, but he shows on the state championship games. Joe McGuire ends up taking a flyer on him. He goes to Texas Tech. So for you guys, there is a point with some positions where the numbers, not even the numbers, but just the production gets so high that you're like, all right, I need to take another look and reevaluate?
In the case of somebody like him specifically, that's somebody I watch and I think he needs to flip to defense.
Okay.
And,
why is that?
Well, for one thing, extensive offensive snaps translate very well to defense at higher levels. Like you said, there is a concern about top end speed, and receivers are not, receivers only get faster by the year. And he's, what is he, 6'2",
Yeah.
and
You guys have him listed 6'2", 185.
yeah. So this is somebody who, the trend on defense is the positionless back 7 or back 8, depending on what your front is. This is somebody I would look at and say, develop him, put 20 to 30 pounds on him, have him be a space backer 3 years from now.
Yeah. Is he even in a box?
A box safety or a space backer, nickel backer. Sometimes there's all kinds of names for it. That's what I see him. And I think we rated him as an athlete, I think, instead of a receiver.
I think you guys now have him listed as a receiver, but I think for a long time you guys did have him. You would stick him back at athlete.
I would put him as an athlete personally, because as a his rating. What we like to do is we want to rate guys where they're going to rate the highest, rather than like if somebody is State U is taking this guy as a receiver, is like, well, he's not going to be projected as well at this specific position as if we just put the athlete label on him and he flips to defense, So
there's a lot of dynamics you guys have to deal with on that too. As far as it relates to a school may tell a recruit they're recruiting him as a wide receiver, and you guys have to deal with the team side of that too, that are going to really always buy into what that coaching staff is going to tell them about a player. But well, I got news for you. These coaching staffs aren't always 100% honest.
The reality is that within a week of getting there, he's going to be a corner.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we have to keep this relationship with the team side and with the coaching staff, and like that. There is the whole dynamic with that sometimes, but
well, I mean, in all fairness, the team guys do have to go by what those coaches inform them of. If Jimbo Fisher goes out in the National Signing Day press conference and says that was it Gabriel Brownlow? Was it
Gabriel Brownlow Dindy?
Yeah, Dindy is a defensive end. I mean,
yeah,
you got to go by it. But he's a 300.
He's 6'2", 290, and has a 6'10" wingspan. Was verified on a laser in the high 4.8s, like he's a freak show.
Yeah, but I mean that could have been a bad example too, because he's only
but
I think he said in that press conference he's a DN to us.
Like a 290-pound guy's, even if he's technically structurally the last guy on the end, like he's an interior player.
Right. Yeah. He's a 3-tech that were happen in a lineup off the edge. Exactly right. Pickle, do we have any questions from the people?
Yeah, we have quite a few. We'll start off with Steph did send this in, and it kind of ties into another one, so I'll put this one first. But in addition to track times, Gabe's a guy who likes to watch basketball tape when it comes to evaluating a football prospect. What are you looking for when you see a prospect playing hoops? So
there's all kinds of any extra sport, any multiple sport background is good. I'm generally like not going to knock somebody for not being Dominique Wilkins. Having said that, there are 2-foot jumpers and 1-foot jumpers, and there are players who have some bounce, but they have to stop and gather and jump off of 2 feet, as opposed to guys who fly around and jump off 1 foot and punch it. That's a clear difference in athletic ability. There's sport-specific skill. I'll tell you one, 23 class Jalen Hale from Longview was a very, very good basketball player his sophomore year, and highly productive, and knows how to shoot it and handle it, but was like a true basketball player. And then you check his junior tape, and he's finishing breaks, jumping off 1 foot, dunking with one hand. Like, not only does he have the sport-specific skill, which is valuable from especially a receiver standpoint with dexterity and ball skills and everything, but you see athletic development there too, and that's big. Like I don't know if anybody would have considered him a possession receiver just because he wasn't dunking, but every data point you can possibly get is valuable, and seeing him be able to do that his junior year in basketball lets you know that there's clear athletic development going on.
He's a big dude, man. Like, he's one that's really grown up kind of before our eyes because he started at Longview as a freshman.
He was he's the only freshman to play varsity under John King.
Really?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but just to look at him now, how he's grown kind of before our eyes, so to speak. I mean, and he's a very talented player. I like Jalen Hill a lot.
Yeah.
But even diving deeper, like if I evaluate my own rankings prowess over the years, receiver is one of those positions, especially in Texas because there's so many really good receivers. I evaluate my receiver rankings as one of the areas that I have to really closely monitor because I miss on a lot of bigger bodied wide receivers because they're so dominant in high school, and they're able to body up smaller defensive backs and use size to their advantage, and really that's where Gabe and I have bounced ideas over each other over the years, and that's an area where I feel like I'm started to become better to come around to his way of thinking more on track times and stuff as it relates to the wide receiver position, especially because that could be the thing that really differentiates out one receiver from another, and not just to take, he put up 1,300 yards and he's dominating the district and all that, you know what I mean? Because I'm a very big in pads type of guy. I like to see guys with my own two. That's just how I'm old school when it comes to that, and I try to use a more new age approach now as it relates to the offensive skill positions, running back and wide receiver.
You look at somebody like Jalen Waddle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he was, everybody had him, I think, top 100, top 75 nationally. And you look back and you're like, well, it wasn't high enough because he went in the top 10 in the draft. Yeah. Why wasn't he higher? And then you go back and watch, not only his tape, but his basketball. He's 5'9", maybe 5'9", and he is jumping off 1 foot, punching it on fast breaks at 5'8.5". He was a 10-6 100-meter guy his junior year. There's all of these things that, if he were to come along now, it would be he would definitely be a 5-star.
But at the same time, because let me ask another question, because Jalen Waddle's a good example. Correct me if I'm wrong. Bel Air Episcopal, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he's playing at the private school ranks in Texas. This gets into a larger conversation about this. In my opinion, I think that the top end of the private schools is really, really good, but I also feel like overall, it's kind of the quality of play is a little bit inconsistent. That's just my overall take on the matter. How much do you weigh in a kid is out there dominating at the 6A level versus going out there and dominating at the private school level, going out there and dominating at the 2A level? A guy like James Washington, right? Stanford, things like that. How much does that factor into your evaluations as well?
I take it into consideration.
Definitely.
I think that's something we talk about all the time.
I had to go back and look at Waddle, by the way. I swore that we had him as a 5-star. I was like, man, I remember how well he was in that Army Bowl that year.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I was like, man.
Yeah, he's
I
unbelievable. To your point about the top of the private school, I think that not only in the realm of private school ball, but on the rosters themselves that reflects. The maybe top 5 to 10 private schools are kind of the only ones that colleges really, St. Pius in Houston,
All Saints,
Parish,
Nolan's the same way too.
Nolan, Bishop Lynch, Bishop Dunn. You can name the ones. There's really on two hands that schools really hammer for recruits. And if you go to a private school, get Prestonwood. We were at a Prestonwood St. Pius game a couple years ago, and something that reflects also on the rosters is the rosters are top heavy. People ask me how do the private powers compare to the publics, and I say would not be able to play at a state level at 5A or 6A. Could they play at a state level at 4A? They could probably go pretty deep. When La Vega and Argyle and Carthage and I probably wouldn't pick a Prestonwood or somebody like that against one of your juggernaut teams at the top into 4A like that. But that gives you some kind of frame of reference. If a player is, like you mentioned, James Washington, like Reginald Davis at Tenaha, that's where the
Marlon's going to have a bunch of kids. Marlon's got a bunch of guys.
They've got Darian Gillette,
Also a great basketball player.
Oh yeah, has crazy basketball stuff. And that was one for me that we bumped him up. I initially made him a kind of a mid to high 3, and then I got a hold of some more data on him, including basketball stuff, and I was like, well, this guy's a 4-star because the tape is good, but that is something where I'm calibrated to 6A. I'm calibrated to Florida 7A, 8A, Alabama 7A, Georgia 6A.
6A, 5A, and Carthage.
Yeah, that's right. That's fair.
I kind of always put it into, we done a lot of stuff in Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Louisiana. I always kind of put it in our private schools in Texas to try to think how they would translate, to a state like Oklahoma. Parish Episcopal is not going to go up and beat Broken Arrow, Jinx, or Union, but I would probably hedge my money. I'd probably hedge my money that they would beat Del City. You know what I mean? Or a school like that, which is one of the higher classification schools in Oklahoma and may have more depth than Parish. But I think the talent at a school like Parish would outweigh a team like that so much that you do have to put it in perspective. And if you're at a private school in Oklahoma, like a Heritage Hall or something like that, you're typically not going to come down here and compete in football. So I do think our private schools in St. Louis, all the schools are private schools in St. Louis pretty much, whereas, they produce 25 or 30 D1 guys in a class. If the numbers are still in that range, we're going to produce, 350?
200, yeah.
So this actually leads perfectly into another question that we had here, but Jacob John asked, what states are continuously underrated on producing talent?
I can tell you the big boys, the biggest of big boys are Texas and Florida. Right there on their heels are Georgia and California. The per capita king may be Louisiana. I mean, if you look at state populations and then the number of FBS signees,
I can actually pull this up.
Louisiana is
Believe it or not, I can actually do this because I'm working on a piece for the magazine. If you're looking for high school signees per capita, basically, in 2022, your mileage may vary. It was Georgia. It goes Georgia, Alabama, Utah.
Man, Georgia. That's insane that Georgia's per capita. Because, that's a big population.
Georgia's putting out 1.7 high school signees per 100,000.
That's
How far did California fall on that list? Because one thing I noticed, and we had this conversation, is that there were players in the California top 100 this year who didn't sign.
California's 28th.
Which is crazy. That's crazy to me because it's changed. Like when I first started in this business, it was, Texas, California, and Florida.
Yeah.
And Georgia's really come up.
California
into that,
per capita fewer than Connecticut.
Wow.
That's insane. Georgia also has a big high school football culture. It's not too dissimilar from Texas, where people actually, there's media that pays attention to it, which is really not common. I don't think people understand how spoiled they are in Texas, how not just the media, but even Max Preps, which is under the Viacom CBS Paramount umbrella with us at 247 Sports. The coaches in Texas are far more likely to fill out their max prep stats properly than Louisiana or Alabama or California. So people in Texas, I sometimes don't really know if they understand how spoiled they are from a media exposure and coverage and all. You can consume high school football year round in this state.
Yeah.
And that's not really very common at all.
So coaches, fill out your questionnaires is what we're saying.
But that's
100% of them.
Well, we're close to 90% right now.
Nice.
So we're doing
Let's
good.
go.
That to me is what I always tell people about, like, as far as comparing high school football across classifications, is like, I think there was a lot of talk when Mater Dei came to Texas and they bully balled Duncanville in the opener, right? And it was like, oh man, like California flexing. I'm like, all right, but I would love to take, like, I've never thought that, like, number 1 through 8, let's say, in California, Georgia, Florida, Ohio's probably in that mix. Pennsylvania's kind of fallen off recently, but like a couple of states absolutely can go toe to toe with the big boys here in Texas. But it's like numbers 9 through 50.
Yeah,
you want to bow up? It's like that's the no contest. And your point about Oklahoma is super interesting, because I worked in Oklahoma briefly, and what I realized about them is, like, Jenks and Union and Broken Arrow, legit. Like, they are outstanding programs.
And Bixby's gotten that way.
Gotten that way. After that, though, it falls off, and it falls off in a hurry, whereas in Texas, the depth here is just it's plain and simple, it's unmatched. Like,
a lot of it is population base.
Yeah.
I've had this discussion with the great Brandon Huffman.
Okay.
About he's our national recruiting editor, West Coast guru. He's originally from Southern California. He lives in suburban Seattle now, but we had this discussion at length when Mater Dei came out here and, just brained Duncanville.
Yeah.
And Mater Dei is literally an all-star team. Like, it's an all-star team. And
that's the team we watched down in Mansfield too, about what, 4?
That was De La Salle.
That was De La Salle?
Yes.
Okay.
And Mater Dei, I think, has kind of become what De La Salle used to be.
Yeah.
And for example, Mater Dei in their sophomore class, we have 3 linemen in the top 65 in the country.
oh my gosh.
2 of them didn't play very much this past fall.
Okay.
Yeah, one of them is a D lineman who's 6'5", 285, with a 33.5-inch arm and all the, like, he has 90 seconds of tape, and it's him just throwing people.
I would say even, we have a lot more depth in Texas than some of those teams, but when you're only going to play your starters, right?
Right.
So, like, you're traveling to Texas to play one of the top teams, your top 22 guys are going to play, and that's the ones that matter.
And that's to your point, California, that league is called the Trinity League. Mater Dei, St. John Bosco, there's several names you probably recognize. I think Santa Margarita may be one of them.
Yeah.
It's a league of like 10, 11, 12 schools. And I was talking to Huffman, and I was like, well, what about outside of that? He's like, well, you have Corona Centennial, like Publix, Corona Centennial, Long Beach Poly, a couple others. He said, then nothing.
Yeah.
And so he went to a big high school, because all the high schools in Southern California are big. He went to Ventura. I said, so what if Ventura played, insert
Lake Travis?
I said, what if Ventura played like random, like 3rd, 4th place in district DFW 6A? He said it would be 50-0 at halftime. The DFW team would beat them so bad. Like, he was saying that there is no depth.
Right.
Relative to the Trinity League,
right.
Outside of the Trinity League, whereas, like you say, if you take teams 20 to 150 in Texas, there's not going to be many states that stack up.
Right. Okay, last question for you guys, and then I'll get you out of here. On both sides of the spectrum, is there in your history, is there a guy that you hopped on the bandwagon maybe when nobody else wanted to, and you were proven right? And then on the other side, is there somebody that you watched the tape and you were like, I don't know if I buy that, and it made you, and he's made you feel stupid?
Ooh, that's on the spot. I mean, the one on the top side for me is Patrick Mahomes. I think that's the one I probably get the most credit for. And Gabe was around to watch him too. I think if Gabe was in the rankings game, he probably would have been right there with me on rating him high. So, but Patrick Mahomes is probably the one that I could really hang my hat on as being like that guy who I saw something really special in that for some reason no one else saw it. You know, that was another one. I have my other guy too. This is my like biggest.
Your biggest whiff?
I have
so to
two.
speak?
I mean, but we'll keep it strictly to Texas. Mike Mitchell. Mike
Okay.
Mitchell is a guy who, I mean, he was an everything linebacker at Prestonwood Christian Academy, come from a very athletic family. I think whenever he came out of high school, he had the #1 all-time in the history spark rating, which at that time, combines 40-yard pro shuttle, power ball, and vertical jump. So he tested through the roof. I went to a game where he played Royce City, a public school team, and I think he had 36 tackles in that game, one game, and I was like, yeah, Mike Mitchell's the dude.
I saw that team against Henderson the year after Henderson won it, and in Henderson, and I mean they just obliterated them. It was him, and it was Michael Irvin's son.
Yeah,
and the tight end was it Christian Morgan, I think was his name, went to Ole Miss, but they were loaded.
Those were probably the two for me on both ends
Okay.
of that spectrum, I guess.
I think for me the one I always go back to is Laviska Shenault. I think it was the state 7-on-7 tournament in 2015, and Terrence Orr said, hey, you got to come watch this guy. And so I was watching him out there. He's dominating. It's 7-on-7, but if you're out there being the guy for DeSoto, that means something. And, nobody had even, ever interviewed him or anything. So that was one I felt pretty good about. Being higher on him than anybody else. Levi Onzarike is another one that we were higher on than anybody else was by far. Those are two guys that I think we were the only ones that had them as 4s, and everybody else had them as 3s. And Levi, we had just outside the top 100 nationally, and he's a second-round pick. As far as guys that I was like, I don't know, one guy that I know he's good, but
You didn't see it?
I could see it, but I just didn't know he was going to become what he became.
I didn't believe.
Part of it was he tore his ACL his senior year. It was Jamar Chase.
Ooh, that's
Well, he
tough.
made you look real dumb this year.
Well, we had each other's back on that one then, because that was my final 247 Louisiana.
Yeah.
So
I liked Terrace Marshall more.
Yeah,
he's a second rounder.
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, Jamar Chase is one I was not high enough on.
By being not high enough, though, he's saying on Jamar Chase is like maybe he was 1 or 2 spots.
You had him 104.
Well, and to his credit, my former scouting director at 247, Barton Simmons, who is now the player personnel man for Vanderbilt, he was like, Jamar Chase is a 5. Barton is like the receiver whisperer.
Yeah.
He's the guy that you go to.
He had Henry Ruggs as the #1 receiver in the country when nobody else even had him close to that.
Yeah.
And then he was the first receiver taken in his draft. So, but Jamar Chase, I was too low on him. But Terrace Marshall at the time was, I thought, the best high school receiver I'd ever seen in person, and he's probably still in either 2 or 3 in that discussion now. So.
Well, Braylon James says he's a hybrid between Terrace Marshall and Jamar Chase.
He's a dude.
So.
Braylon James is he's pretty ferocious.
All right, finally, how are you feeling about the Dogs? How are you feeling about the Carthage Bulldogs this year?
I mean, a lot of turnover on defense, which has really been their calling card for 2 years.
Kip Lewis ain't walking through that door.
No, he's not. I'm sure they're going to be fine. They should have a lot back on offense. They should have, their 2 best runners are back. Their best receiver is back. Their quarterback is back. Their FBS left tackle is back. They have a lot back on offense. which is what got them in trouble. In the playoffs was just offensive consistency. But, it's.
Are you happy to be back in Region 2, though?
Yeah, I think, speaking for.
Got the Carthage wristband
the
here,
wristband,
too.
Yeah. Speaking for the fan base, which I don't know if I should, while
you're the most prominent Carthage fan I know.
Well, while geographically and kind of culturally, Carthage is more like Center, Jasper, that like down that way. From a travel standpoint, just being able to go down I-20 to playoff games is a lot easier than going down like 96 to Beaumont or 59 to like New Caney and all that's not a big deal, but like you have to stop through all those little towns along Diboll and Livingston, and I think people really like being able to just go to either Marshall or Longview and hit I-20 to Rose Stadium or to Forney or to the Star. Like I think it's very much preferred travel logistics for the fan base.
I have to admit that I caught some positive vibes from Coach at coaching school. I thought.
Well,
I thought that we were
coaching, or when we saw him in College Station. That's right. I'm just glad. I think he's optimistic, but he's always usually pretty optimistic. He's not. Scott Surratt's not a sandbagger.
Well, no, he's not. And the thing with him is that if you ask him, how do you think you're going to be? And he says, I think we're going to be pretty good. That means you're going to be really, really good.
Yeah.
Like that's usually what that means.
That's the level of sandbagging. He's not going to be like, I don't know if we're going to be. No, he won't do that. But like,
and I think
he'll have this look in his eye of like, I think we might have something.
I actually think his quote might have been, "They're pretty good." So
and then he gave his smile, and that's when you knew.
Yeah, but I also just am impressed that he's still talking with us, considering we cursed him on the cover last year. Like that's fair.
Well,
I was very worried.
This is fair.
I don't know, "curse" is the right word, but when you're talking about Carthage,
yeah,
I think they're going to be.
They go to the third round, losing the eventual state champ by 9 points.
Cursed.
I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah,
I really had to eat some crow on that too because my wife's.
She says hello, by the way.
She in the comments?
Yeah.
Her cousins went to China Spring.
Ooh, that's a tough scene.
And so we were at Thanksgiving the day before that game.
Oh no!
And they were asking me, and I was like, like if the teams play to their capabilities, China Spring shouldn't play within 3 scores of them.
Oh no!
So they'd surely,
yeah.
24 hours later, an ostrich egg
Your
was laid.
phone was ringing.
Thanksgiving at your folks' place this year.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. He's Gabe Brooks of 247Sports, and of course, Greg Powers of Next Level Athlete.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you would like more and to be notified when they come out, go ahead and click that subscribe button right down there. You can also watch Texas Football Today every day live at noon on TexasFootball.com, Facebook, Twitch, and right here on YouTube. For more of the best coverage of Texas football in the Lone Star State, go to TexasFootball.com/subscribe.